The Jacksonville Jaguars were one of 11 teams to officially start their OTA period during this NFL offseason. And on today's show, I figured I'd break down about 5 players that I'm keeping an eye on throughout this kind of, you know, overall time that where the Jaguars are competing. Again, there's no pads, there's no hitting involved and everything, but just something to keep in mind ahead of the 2026 NFL season. Is there any good reports coming out? Is there any chance that some of these guys are getting runs with the first team? We'll talk about it all here on this episode of Jags Now, presented by our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. And guys, I got a little challenge for you at home. Last week, y'all crushed it in terms of the support, and our most liked video got 217 likes. Is there any way we can beat it on today's show? Can we get 220 likes? It's a free and easy way to support us here at Chat Sports, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Help us grow this Jacksonville Jaguars community. All right, getting into the first player that I'm keeping an eye on during this OTA period, and that's none other than Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver out of LSU, who I think he's going to be somebody that a lot of Jaguars fans are, up in the air about. Not in terms of like there's any doubt or anything, but I think in the wide receiver room last season, Parker Washington really emerged this back half of the last year as the Jaguars wide receiver one. His last month of the stretch, what we've talked about numerous times on the show. Jakobi Meyers, the trade for him from the Las Vegas Raiders was really something that I think gave this team a spark and a boost that really propelled them the second half of the year. And Brian Thomas Jr. didn't have a great 2025. There's no other way around it, especially coming off that 2024 rookie season where he was lighting the world on fire. And I think there's no other way to say this. This is a huge year for Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, you look at the stats on screen, they were down across the board from 2024 to 2025. And I think that a bit of his confidence was lost. I think adjusting to Liam Cohen's offense had a factor into it, but his overall just fit into Jacksonville and what Liam Cohen is trying to build in Jacksonville, I think there's a role for it. And I think that Liam Cohen wants Trevor Lawrence to continue to push the ball down the field as he did much more often the second half of the season. Well, what's a great way to doing that? Targeting guys that can get behind the defense. Well, what can Brian Thomas Jr. do? He can get behind the defense. He's got that blazing speed along with the physical stature to really be an opposing force on the outside. It just depends on, is he going to get the trust of the coaching staff, Trevor Lawrence, and this group? Because these other two guys in Parker Washington and Jakobi Meyers, they're not going anywhere, and they're going to want their fair share of targets as well. But I expect Brian Thomas Jr. to be a more locked in, focused overall player for Jacksonville in 2026. But you guys, let me know down in the comments section below. Who do you think the Jaguars wide receiver one is in 2026? Type PW if you think it's Parker Washington. Type BTJ if you think it's Brian Thomas Jr. Or type JM if you think it's Jakobi Meyers. Getting into our second player that we're going to be watching during this OTA period, and that is Emmanuel Pregnon, the offensive guard who you drafted in the third round out of the University of Oregon. We'll tell you more about him along with some other players that I want you guys to keep an eye on here for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but we could not do today's show if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. The playoffs are here for basketball, baseball is underway, and it's time to cash in with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 sports picks app and is the best place to win cash while watching sports. The app is really easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats, and you lock in your lineup. You guys can even follow me on the app and see all of my favorite lineups at CullenBro21. And I've got a little 2-player lineup for some hoops action that we've got going tomorrow night. I'm going with the more on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, points, rebounds, and assists as a demon play. We'll tell you more about that here in just a second. And I'm also going to take the more on Victor Wembanyama's double-double. I think he's going to get some very clutch rebounds for San Antonio tomorrow night. I think it's going to be a barn burner in the playoffs that we've got coming up here. But more on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's due. I think he's been, flirting around with that kind of PRA number. I think in a potential closeout game, the two-time league MVP could absolutely make a statement in Game 6. We'll see ultimately how it pans out. But again, guys, as long as you play with Prize Picks, you're in good hands. New user offer. Download the Prize Picks app today with the link in the comments and the description and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Getting back to Emmanuel Pregnon here, who I think it's safe to say universally, it was the most celebrated pick by Jacksonville Jaguars fans amongst national media members and people that, cover a team on a daily basis to the casual fans that barely know Jacksonville even exists in Florida. I think Pregnon is somebody that is going to be a major factor in terms of this starting offensive line for Jacksonville here in 2026. I think he has a chance to really compete this upcoming season, and that leaves your two starting offensive guards potentially on the hot seat in both Ezra Cleveland and Patrick Mekari, who I think for the most part, they were fine additions, or fine players, for Jacksonville last season, but both of them kind of had their ups and downs as we kind of look at their PFF grades from last season. Ezra Cleveland, I thought he was your third best offensive lineman, but behind Anton Harrison and Cole Van Landen. Graded out overall pretty solid, above average across the board in overall run blocking. Was a really good pass blocker, but did have 3 penalties and 4 sacks. Mekari, I thought, really struggled. He did have that back injury towards the back half of the year that didn't help, but he wasn't playing his best football. Just, around average in a lot of the important grades. Did have 9 penalties last year from the right guard spot, and I think Emmanuel Pregnon, whether it is Ezra Cleveland, who is starting that left guard spot that Emmanuel Pregnon did play last year at Oregon, or Patrick Mekari at that right guard spot, who I think that's more of a discussion. Could Pregnon challenge for the starting right guard spot? I think that, going into this training camp, I'm very interested to see how much run Emmanuel Pregnon gets in with the ones and the starting offensive linemen versus the twos. And, obviously, because they're not allowed to hit each other and actually get physical in the offensive line part of things right now, you're not going to necessarily know the, full true value of what these guys are bringing to the table. That being said, I think Emmanuel Pregnon is going to get his fair shot, and I'm interested to see what the reports are coming out of OTAs. Moving on to a guy who did not even take a snap last year in 2025, and that is Caleb Ransaw, the defensive back out of Tulane. And I have him right now slotted on the Jaguars defensive back depth chart behind Antonio Johnson at the strong safety position. And there's not really a great place that I feel about putting him, because if you remember back in college, Ransaw really played a multitude of different positions while at Tulane and at Troy. You see the numbers on screen. 766 snaps in the slot, but you got Jordan Lewis, who you signed to a contract last offseason to kind of lock up that role. He's healthy, so I'm not sure if he's going to overtake Jordan Lewis's spot. Can play a little outside corner, and he plays a little bit of box safety. So I think he's kind of a versatile chess piece that I'm not really sure what his role is. I think he's going to have a spot regardless, and he's going to have an opportunity to play. I'm just really not sure where that is. And as I mentioned off the top, he did miss 2025, the entire season, with a foot injury that he suffered in the offseason program last year. And I think that based on all reports so far from yesterday, he looks healthy. He looks like he's ready to go. I'm interested to see how Anthony Campanelli and the crew use Caleb Ransaw in 2026. Keep an eye on him during this offseason period. Moving on now to Chris Rodriguez, who he was one of, I think, four to six Jaguars players who did not participate in the Jaguars OTAs program yesterday. They don't have to disclose any injuries. NFL teams do at this point, so we're not quite sure what the deal is with Chris Rodriguez. But he was your lone really external free agent that you brought in if you're Jacksonville to kind of replace the void that was left by Travis Etienne. And I think he's going to have a notable role. You see last year at 500 yards in 13 games, 6 rushing touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry. And, Bashal Tutin, I would still imagine, is this team's RB1 going into next season. And how much of that snap share, how money, or what opportunities will Chris Rodriguez get under Liam Cohen? I'm not really sure. We've talked about it in the past that they have that connection from Liam Cohen's time as the offensive coordinator back when he was in Kentucky. Chris Rodriguez had his best season in college, so they clearly have familiarity with one another. This, undisclosed, keeping him out of OTAs, not the greatest start that you would love to hear from Chris Rodriguez. That being said, he could very well show up today during OTAs, so we'll see kind of the update on that. But regardless, I think he's going to be a factor in this offense. We'll see how much of it will be when the season actually kicks off. And finally, the last player that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, and this is one that we've hinted at in terms of, I think for the most part, you can pencil in a lot of starters for the Jacksonville Jaguars. That being said, that linebacker spot next to Foye Oluokun, I think Dennis Gardeck is your Sam linebacker who is going to contribute a lot more on pass rush downs and defending the run. I don't think you want him backpedaling that much. So in your kind of base nickel sets, Foye Oluokun is going to be your Mike. Is it going to be Ventrell Miller, or is it going to be Jack Kiser? That's, takes that will linebacker spot in Anthony Campanelli's defense. Obviously, Devin Lloyd left for the Carolina Panthers during NFL free agency not too long ago. So I think it's a competition between both of these fourth round or former fourth round draft picks and Ventrell Miller and Jack Kiser. Does Kiser get a real crack at it? It feels like Ventrell Miller is the leader in the clubhouse as we currently sit here. So I'm not really sure how much of a fight Jack Kiser can give. That being said, he is a James Gladstone draft pick, so maybe they have more of a vision of what he could be for Jacksonville in 2026. Ultimately, we'll see how much of the workload he gets with the ones versus a guy like Ventrell Miller. But let me know down below in the comments section, which player are you most wanting to hear about from OTAs? I just gave you guys 5 names that I'm really excited to potentially hear about. So let me know down in the comment section. And that'll conclude this episode of Jags Now presented by Chat Sports. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will have you covered with all the latest Jags news and rumors throughout the offseason. So make sure you hit that sub button.